It is sometimes so unbelievable, the truth escapes becoming known.
The answer to all this and the clue to this cosmic riddle may be found in the ancient book of Genesis. And back there in chapter 6, we are told of a very amazing and bizarre event. The sons of God saw the daughters of men and saw that they were beautiful, and they lusted after them.
Rosemary's Baby had it right. The Antichrist is the seed of the dragon, in my opinion. Is he walking around? Very possibly. I don't know. Could be. Why not now? Look at where we are. Look at all the signs that are manifesting.
And then we read they married them and sired children from them.
Genesis 3:15 is the key that unlocks the door to the rest of the Bible. Because when we get to Nephilim 101, Genesis 6, when men began to increase on number on the earth, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God, the sons of God, the sons of God, saw the daughters of men were beautiful. The antithesis to this is that the sons of God are somehow the godly line of Seth, and the daughters of men, right, are the hoochie mamas of Cain. But I don't see hoochie mama there. So something is drastically wrong with this picture. The sons of God will get into this, B'nai Elohim. So it always refers to the angelic host. And they married any of them they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit will not contend with man forever. He is mortal. His days will be 120 years. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards, when the sons of God went into the daughters of men and had children by them. And I'll get into that. And it has to do with this book of Enoch, which is not part of our canon. Jude quotes it. It's hysterical how people will, well, it's really not part of our canon, but, you know, Jude, they all knew about the book of Enoch. If you were going to take, this is my opinion, this is L.A. Marzulli's opinion, if you were going to take one book out of the Bible and make sure people didn't read Enoch 1, that's the book you take out, because it shows exactly what's going on. Let me read it to you. And you tell me, it's almost word to word what we get in Genesis 6. And it came to pass when the children of men multiplied that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. Go back here. When men began to increase in number on the earth and the daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw the daughters of men were beautiful. It's almost exactly alike. The verbiage is almost identical. And the angels, this is where it differs, and the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them and said to one another, come, let us choose wives from among the children of men.
The ancient interpretation, and in my opinion the correct one, is that the sons of God were demonic beings or fallen angels, and that they came down to earth, they lusted after the daughters of men, they married them, and produced this amazing progeny, this hybrid progeny of the Nephilim. And the very word Nephilim does not mean giants. It comes from the root Nephal, fallen ones. The early Christian fathers, in the first 4 centuries, men like Irenaeus, Tertullian, Ambrose, for 400 years they knew no other interpretation except that the sons of God were angelic beings.
Now, I want you to notice a couple of things while I have this text on the screen. I want you to notice verse 1 and 2 are one sentence, that the daughters of men are the daughters that were born unto men in general. They weren't a subset. When men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born unto them, that's men in general had daughters in general. You with me? Some people try to make, you'll see, I'll get into that later, that the daughters of men are a specific subset. There's no textual basis for that. But the real issue that should hit us between the eyes, what on earth is meant by the sons of God coming in unto the daughters of men? What's translated in English Bible, sons of God, is in the Hebrew, B'nai Elohim. Strange term, but here's the point. That term is used in the Old Testament exclusively of angels. Job 1:6, 2:1, 38:7 being well-known examples. The term, while it's strange to our ears perhaps, the sons of God is a term for a lot, and we could spend all morning on why that term is so carefully and consistently used in the Scripture for certain circumstances. You and I, we're products of John chapter 1, verse 11. As many as it believed on him, he gave power to become the sons of God. Different issue. That's used of believers in the New Testament, never used of believers in the Old. To corroborate this view, there was a book called the Book of Enoch. I'm not suggesting that it was inspired canon, but the point is, the Book of Enoch, as it's known in history, was highly venerated by Jewish scholarship from about the 2nd century BC till about the 2nd century AD. And I'm not referencing it because it's correct. I'm referencing it because it demonstrates what the vocabulary and grammar conveyed. The word sons of God, clearly from the Book of Enoch, were understood to mean angels. So it's a highly authoritative translation. And it translates B'nai Elohim as angels. So there's no way to escape the idea that the text implies, in fact, expresses that angels, fallen angels obviously, came down and had some kind of communion, intercourse, with the women that were offsprings of Adam. That's what the text says. It's bizarre, it's uncomfortable to many, but that's what the text says.
And they all answered and said, let us all swear an oath and all bind ourselves by mutual imprecations, not to abandon this plan, but to do this thing. What thing? To take wives. Why are they doing this? The seed of the dragon will be at war with the seed of the woman. What is the dragon afraid of? What does Jesus say? That from the seed of the woman, from the offspring of the woman, what will come? The one who will crush the dragon's head. Who is that one? It's the proto-evangelium. It's the first prophecy in our Bible. The first prophecy in our Bible, that from the seed of the woman, someone is going to come that will crush the dragon's head, take his kingdom away from him. So if you're a dragon, what are you going to do? You're going to go, oh, okay, game over, I quit, you're right, I lose. No. You're going to do everything you can to do what? Pollute the genome, which is exactly what happens in Genesis 6. But if you don't embrace Genesis 3:15, if you just go, well, Marzulli...
Well, now we get to another issue. We're going to talk more this afternoon. Mark Eastman is going to talk a lot about these abductions. And this is probably the really hot button in recent years, is this issue of abductions. There are a deluge of cases being reported that are too bizarre to accept, but they're too frequent and too consistent to ignore. These stories are all over the map, but they basically involve people who believe that they have been abducted by occupants of UFOs, had medical experiments done upon them, almost always involving the reproductive process. They have sperm or eggs harvested. They have fetuses implanted and then later harvested. Some of these people bear scars. The stories are very bizarre.
So, the cattle mutilations, which they've never, ever brought anyone to trial. There's never been any charges against anybody. Initially, oh, it's a satanic cult. No, it's not. There are no footprints around the cow. It's like it was dropped from an altitude. They drop it back in the farmer's field. If these were our benevolent space brothers, why not just take the carcass and drop it off in some ocean someplace? You're in a craft that can zip you from point A to point B in a nanosecond. So why are you dropping it back in the farmer's field? To create the greatest amount of fear that they possibly could do. And these guys are terrified.
There are many churches that have people in the congregations that believe they've been abducted. I've made the remark from public platforms that I don't believe a Christian can be abducted. I'm probably wrong. I want to amend that and say they cannot be abducted against their will.
In the 3rd month of pregnancy, going back here to Brett Baer, unexplained pregnancies. A woman finds herself pregnant. She's overjoyed. In the 3rd month of her pregnancy, she's re-abducted, but she doesn't know that. She wakes up either in the bed or in the bathroom, whatever, and she realizes that the baby is no longer there. But there's no miscarriage. She goes to the emergency room. There's no fetal tissue, nothing. It's like never happened. The doctor looks at her and goes, are you sure you were pregnant? And she goes, talk to my OBGYN. We saw the heartbeat. We know I was pregnant. So the cattle mutilation, the blood and the tissue is to create artificial wombs, in my opinion. Now, I had never been on board talking to the Greys or reptilian shapeshifters. That's conjecture, but it's based on scores, hundreds of hours of research, talking to people who have been on board, and this is what they're doing. The seed of the dragon will be at enmity, at war with the seed of the woman. Can you imagine if I had started here on Friday? Most of you would have gotten up and left. You will bring good out of whatever comes into my life, because that's your job description. That's what you will do. I might not see it, I might not know it, but I declare it, even though I don't see it. I walk by faith that you will bring good into my life, into our life, into my family's life. And that's what you got to stand on. Either that or we cower in fear. So, cattle mutilations by Tucker Carlson. I mean, can you imagine this? The ninth rung, Take Me to Your Leaders. Congress holds first public hearing on UFOs in 50 years. So here's the deal. It's a joke. Why is it a joke? Because the shadow government has been dealing with these eggheads since they're dealing with... I've had people come up to me off the record. They won't come on the record because they can't. They work in underground, deep underground military bases next to the Greys. Number 10, this is Gary Nolan. I've spoken to him before, specifically with the DNA results. He talks about interference syndrome. In other words, when a person is in the proximity of a UFO for a period of time, things will happen. They can get brain injuries. They'll get trauma to the brain. The juxtaposition is striking. It's almost like Beauty and the Beast. That's the 11th rung. And then Tucker's UFO files. The 12th rung on the ladder. Do you speak extraterrestrial? Science say Earth needs to prepare for an alien encounter now before it's too late. 13th rung on the ladder. We interviewed him. This is Robert Salas. He was the guy at the Maelstrom base. We interviewed him in our Watchers series. So he's at the Maelstrom Air Force Base in Montana, 1967. 60-foot orange craft, UFO, is over the gate to the base. 9 intercontinental ballistic missiles are switched off. No one touches them. They touch them.
The universal story agrees with the record of every major culture of the ancient world in which the astonishingly consistent story is told of gods that descended from heaven and or came through spiral vortices to materialize in bodies of flesh. From Rome to Greece, and before that to Egypt, Persia, Assyria, Babylonia, Sumer, the earliest records of civilization tell of the era when powerful beings known to the Hebrews as Watchers, and in the book of Genesis as the B'nai Ha-Elohim, the sons of God, mingled themselves with humans, giving birth to part celestial, part terrestrial hybrids known as Nephilim. The Bible says this happened when men began to increase on earth and daughters were born to them, when the sons of God saw the women's beauty, and they took wives from among them to sire their unusual offspring. I believe a record of this is recorded in Genesis 6:4, when it says there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. And archaeologists believe the writing on this great wall continued from 1,000 years before Christ or earlier up until about AD 1300, the same time that the Anasazi suddenly disappeared. So the writing stopped when the Anasazi disappeared. The Anasazi, who disappeared when the habit of this type of writing also suddenly ceased, used images and symbols similar to those found globally that connect to a first and second incursion of giants and the mountainous gateways that those creators came through. Now, that being true, if you take only the images that the Anasazi left behind and compare them to similar, in some cases identical, universal symbols found elsewhere around the world where the stories and meanings of the images have been made clear, and keeping in mind that these legends materialized globally at approximately the same time, it's more likely than not, in my opinion, that the universal story agrees with the record of every major culture of the ancient world in which the astonishingly consistent story is told of gods that descended from heaven and or came through spiral vortices to materialize in bodies of flesh. From Rome to Greece, and before that to Egypt, Persia, Assyria, Babylonia, Sumer, I believe a record of this first incursion of hybrid humans and six-toed giants is recorded in Genesis 6:4 when it says there were giants in the earth in those days. That's the first incursion before the flood. And also after that, that is after the flood, the second incursion, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown.
So there's an elongated skull on the left, there's a human skull on the right. Notice the size of the orbits. Notice the size of the skull. Notice the reddish hair. Here's a 2,000-year-old mummy skull in Peru that we unwrapped. Notice this is 2,000 years old. We had carbon dating on it. Notice the intricate of the weave and the colors still vibrant. Notice the elongation. That's what it looked like. Let's walk through it quickly. Reddish hair, look at the size of the orbits. You think that's natural? That's not natural. They're 25 to 30% larger pupillary distance. Something is going on here. Something is going on. And when they were discovering these things like 150, 175 years ago, we ourselves, these archaeologists, there was this debate. Oh, it's all cranial deformation. They found this mummy called the Marzulli mummy. And the mummy was a female, and the female was pregnant. So they decided, let's open her up and see what the fetus looks like. So they did, and this is what the fetus looks like. Elongated skull, look at the neck. Elongated neck, and look at the teeth. Babies don't come out with teeth. Babies don't have this type of formation. And it's not hydrocephaly, where water's on the brain and it swells. It's not that. This is a genetic aberration. The mitochondrial DNA mutations unknown in human, primate, or animal known so far. This is the basis of our DNA. I gotta go quickly. So look at this. This is what we call the Arroyo skull, and it was found in what's now a mining town. Look at the very prominent zygomatic arch, and we did DNA testing on that. There's a normal human being. It's all wrong. It's all wrong. This is one of the DNA evidence that we did. This is really important. This is the work of our anthropologist on our team, Rick Woodward. This is the foramen magnum. Everybody in this room has one. This is where our skeleton, the spinal column, attaches to the base of the skull. This is really important. This is his work. This is the smoking gun, because it shows us that what we're looking at is not cranial deformation. That's the foramen magnum. It should be in the center of the skull, just like it is with everybody in the room. If it's not, you have trouble balancing your head and doing this, right? In all the Paracca skulls, the foramen magnum, you can see, is pushed all the way back to the occipital plate, all the way back to the rear, the posterior of the skull. If it's any further back on some of these things, it's outside the skull. You cannot, I repeat, you cannot cradle headboard a child and move the foramen magnum. The foramen magnum here should be up in here someplace, in the center of a skull. It's done in utero. When the child is still in the womb, everything is formed. This is something that's genetic. In our film, the DNA evidence number 6 in our On the Trail of the Nephilim series, we have archaeologists, anthropologists, surgeons, medical doctors, optometrists, chiropractors, all coming on the record stating whatever this is, it's genetic. Genesis 3:15, the seed of the dragon will be at war, at enmity with the seed of the woman. You say, well, LA, everything I'm showing you is evidence. I could submit this in a court of law and say that there's an outside agency that's deliberately manipulating the genome. And then I can point back to the Genesis 3:15 narrative. You see the way everything starts to go like this? It's all the fingerprints of the supernatural. It's all the fingerprints of the dragon. Moving right along, the foramen magnum. This I got to show you. This is the enigmatic Chongo skull, which I showed you later. So we're doing DNA samples at the Ica Museum, and I asked the archaeologists, can we Can we just look at the Chongo skull? Can you take it out of the skull? All we want to do is have you rotate it. We wanted to see where the placement of the foramen magnum is. Watch this.
Massive.
Really is. Oh my God, it's right in the back. Stop. That thing, if it's like a half an inch, it's outside the skull. And when I saw that, you could hear my voice. I'm going, it should be in here. It should be like, the whole thing should be back in here. It's not. It's all the way to the occipital plate. You cannot move the foramen magnum. You can't do that. It's done in utero. It's in the uterus. It's formed. You can't move that through cranial deformation. My discovery on Catalina Island, there were pictures that I found in the archives. What's that? What is this? They're elongated skulls. What is that doing on Catalina Island, which is 27 miles across the ocean from Los Angeles? Look at the elongated skull. Similarity? You tell me. The seat of the dragon will be at enmity at war with the seat of the woman. This photograph went viral. I discovered it. So there's Ralph Glidden, who's a primitive archaeologist employed by the Hay Museum, 1919 and 1921. The Hay Museum gets gobbled up by the Smithsonian. He unearths this giant skeleton. Look at the size of the head. I had 3 different researchers look at the picture, digitize the picture, and this is what we came up with. So we take the original photograph, we take Ralph out, we know he was 5'8". He was 5'8". We take the skeleton, we stand him up, and we basically get an 8'9" skeleton. So, Washington Herald, prehistoric giant unearthed. Seymour, Texas. Oil drillers claim to have found bones of a prehistoric giant 10 feet high. The Department of Agriculture yesterday received from an agent on Tiburon Island, Gulf of California, the skeleton of a primitive man more than 10 feet tall. 15 feet tall. The skeleton of a prehistoric man of large size has been found at a town 10 miles southeast city of Mexico. And it just goes on. A doctor who was present stated that the man must have been 11 feet tall. The mound was partially covered by a pine stump 3 feet 6 inches in diameter, and the ground showed no signs of ever having been disturbed. This is in Indiana. This is where a lot of the mounds were and everything else. Check this one out. This is Calcutta. A discovery of worldwide importance is reported from the village of Paintija in the whatever district, where a giant human skeleton was unearthed. 31 feet, possible. I'm doubting that one a little bit.
Let's also consider another not inconsequential step here, that the statue at the Ramesseum had to be lifted up and placed onto its pedestal, itself a monumental block of granite. Now, as large as the remnants of this statue at the Ramesseum are, there is evidence for a couple of statues that were considerably larger. The first one I want to mention is one that I dedicated a video to in the past, but which I've since had the opportunity to visit again. The astonishing foot found at the site of Tanis in the north of Egypt in the Delta.
That's old. So this is another way. There used to be huge statues. But look at the size of that foot. And also in the back, this is not the end. Because they also shaped the rest of it here. So imagine
Yes.
than any of them here. Exactly.
So that
Bigger, as huge as the class 5 Memnon or
bigger.
bigger.
It's at least Petrie calculated it to be roughly like 100 feet tall. Think of this: the size of a seated statue of this size would have been like think of the ones at Luxor are about 60 feet high, so another 40 feet. It's
a seated statue, I guess so.
Yeah, but then the other I did
So it will be bigger than the 1,000-ton statue.
Yeah.
The thing is, still the challenge, the 1,000-ton statue is 350 kilometers from Aswan. Right. Here we're like 1,500 kilometers far from Aswan.
And they probably bring it as a block.
Yeah, the block would have been gigantic, like 1,500, 2,000 tons.
Recent explorations at Karnak Temple, however, have revealed remains from what might have been an even larger statue. And what's more, it seems to have been made from an even harder and more difficult to work stone, conglomerate quartzite. Pieces of this statue are scattered all around the megalithic boneyards of Karnak, but the most impressive piece is undoubtedly this hand. You can see the darker coloration of the stone. That is flint, which is the material ancient Egyptians used to cut granite. Yet here it is, not only cut but smoothed and polished and finished and furnished with amazingly fine detail, like the thumbnail. No analysis of the objects in the museum would be complete without a mention of the notorious schist disc. This is a very complex artifact, labelled naturally as a jar or a vase, that was found amongst primitive flint knives and copper tools in the mastaba of Prince Sabu, a royal from the very first dynasty of the Old Kingdom. People have said many things about the schist disc, and there is lots of speculation as to its purpose. Was it part of a machine? Was it a tool? Or was it just artistic expression and a nice place to put a bunch of flowers? I'm less interested in the speculation about its purpose than I am with the technology that's required to make this piece. Although it's been reassembled and it looks a little wonky, this does not seem to be the result of lathe work, but rather these complex curved surfaces have been precisely carved into very hard stone and then repeated accurately for each of its wings in these sweeping motions that the stone makes. Buckle up, because this is where it gets really interesting, as these massive objects take the evidence for advanced technology in vastly ancient times to a whole new level. I'm talking about the giant columns and the giant statues that are found across many sites, both up and down the length of ancient Egypt. In terms of pure symmetry and a demonstrated mastery of working in hard stone, the huge single-piece flared columns are really hard to beat. My favourite example is a remnant from this column, shaped from pink granite, found at the Old Kingdom site of the Temple of Bastet. It's hard to describe the stonework here as anything less than pure mastery. Consider that the original quarried block of stone must have been wider than the widest part of the flared end on the column, and then worked down to the width of the column body on a perfectly aligned centerline, then shaped and finished with accuracy and symmetry. These seem to have been stamped out in ancient times as if they were made in some sort of giant factory. Dozens of these huge single-piece granite columns are known to exist, or have existed, and the ones from the same installation are all typically identical, and they all feature flared ends in palm or lotus shapes. Here, once again, we see evidence for advanced three-dimensional geometric precision and remarkable symmetry made into huge granite objects that has been replicated over and over again. These statues, be those at Luxor, Karnak, or at the Ramesseum, appear to have all been cut and shaped to the same plan, to the same face, and then that work was carried out with an absolutely mechanical degree of precision. Chris Dunn has derived many different aspects of complex geometry in the construction of the faces, and he's shown that core sacred geometry and mathematical principles like the Fibonacci sequence, Pythagorean right-angle triangles, the golden ratio, and even the flower of life are reflected in the stone. Varying degrees of radial cuts were consistently made into the granite, and the axes of these cuts were blended to form compound surfaces that curve in 3 dimensions, making up the features of the face. These complex surfaces were precisely inversed and replicated from side to side. These faces are symmetrical, and the implications of this when applied to the manufacturing techniques used to make them are, quite frankly, staggering. This near-perfect symmetry is not a characteristic of human faces, nor is it one that we find in other statues from other cultures, and the precision of this symmetry makes this achievement exponentially more difficult to replicate. By doing the same experiment of reversing a photograph and overlaying it transparently onto the centerline of the original, we can see this symmetry in action. Centerline measurements back up this observation, and what is even more astonishing is that this was repeated time and again across multiple statues. Just look at the consistent profile ratio shown here between the eyes and the mouth across multiple statues. How could these have been made? The only way we can accurately and consistently create such complex surfaces today is with computer design and mechanical guidance in CNC machines that are basically milling machines that operate in 3 dimensions. How does this process work for something that is 40, 60, or 90 feet tall and weighs anywhere between 400 and 1,000 tons and is made from granite?
So he's at the Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, 1967. 60-foot orange craft, UFO, is over the gate to the base. 9 intercontinental ballistic missiles are switched off. No one touches them. They touch them. And this is why we're hearing now, seems like extraterrestrials are very interested in our nuclear capabilities. This is what they're preparing us for. What did I say earlier? The late David Flynn talked about a nuclear event somewhere on the planet. If that happens, it creates the greatest collective fear that humanity has ever known. That's when they show up as our saviors. That's the coming great deception. I'll say it again. The coming great deception is if it could happen this way. I'm not saying it will, but it could. A nuclear event will happen somewhere on the planet. The grid lights up. It creates the greatest collective fear that humanity has ever experienced together. Because we're all afraid, who's next? Is it going to erupt into a full-blown war? That's when they show up. They will say that they are our progenitors, that they created all life on this planet. They genetically manipulated early man. They started the world's religions. They started the world's earliest civilizations. And now at this critical juncture in humanity, they, E.T., our space brothers, are back to usher mankind into a global golden age, which causes the great falling away that we read about in the 2nd Thessalonians. Because you got to ask ourselves, what causes the church to fall away? What would cause you, and you to fall away from your faith? Yeah, those guys.